The person I was supposed to marry fell for a street thug and insisted on breaking off our engagement. To prevent him from following that useless gambler, I paid off the gambler. But years later, at the engagement banquet, she lured me out to the suburbs. She snuggled in the arms of that gambler, coldly watching as over 30 people bullied me, beating me mercilessly. They even let wild dogs tear at my body, leaving no trace behind. She said, "If it weren't for you constantly using money to humiliate people, Joe and I would have had kids by now. You self-righteous lapdog, you deserve to die." When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back before applying to Stabler University. Ding! Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. I stared at the densely packed notes in my hand, my expression darkening. At that moment, Joe Haslam, with his bleached hair and a smug look, appeared in front of me, cigarette dangling from his lips. "Hey, isn't this the top student in the year? I'm here to tell you that I've hooked up with your girl." His arms, covered in tattoos, looked intimidating. In my past life, he had that same smug look as he watched me get beaten to death. Even those wild dogs were raised by him, starved for days to destroy my body. "Oh really? That's your skill. Congratulations. By the way, do you want to find her? She's in the classroom." I forced back my hatred and dropped that line, leaving with a smile. In my previous life, I tried every way to stop Joe from pursuing Yvette. This time, I wouldn't. When I stood at the classroom door again, I saw Yvette looking shy. Her cheerful laughter echoed far and wide. "Joe, I agree to be with you." This time, without my interference, Joe successfully confessed. That evening, both families had dinner together, and Yvette was absent. Yvette's mother looked at me with some complaints. "Zion, although it's true that you should take things seriously before the college entrance exam, you can't be so harsh on Yvette. At least let her come back and have dinner with everyone. This child has been close to you since she was young and doesn't listen to us. If there's a next time, you should let her come back for dinner first." I stopped my chopsticks, slowly looked at Mrs. Larkin, and nodded silently. Although I didn't force Yvette to stay at school for tutoring and skip dinner, she had long been used to lying and using me as an excuse. I didn't mind helping her a few more times. After dinner, my stepsister approached me, her face flushed as she pointed her phone camera at me. Gritting her teeth in anger, she said, "Brother, why didn't you stop Yvette from being with Joe? Don't you know this will ruin her life? Besides, the Larkin family and the Stabler family have been in a marriage alliance for generations. How can you stand by?" I pushed her away, brushed off the wrinkles on my clothes, and questioned her with a straight face. "Ha, it's true that there's a marriage alliance, but doesn't the Stabler family still have you, the illegitimate daughter? I'm not in a hurry, so why are you? Besides, why should I care about Yvette? Can I decide her matters? Stop barking at me. If you keep bothering me, be careful I tell Dad about your little dirty thoughts." Her face instantly turned ugly, and for a moment, she couldn't say a word. I quickly pushed her to the door, giving her a mocking glance. A dog with a thief's heart but no courage. Really unremarkable. You have the guts to like someone but not the guts to stop it. Don't use me as a pawn. You're afraid of being bullied by Joe, so you come to me to cause trouble. How pathetic. Watching her face grow paler, her lips moving for a long time without a word, I coldly closed the door. Having lived a life again, how could I not know her little thoughts? In my last life, it was she who told me Yvette had fallen for Joe. She kept saying it was for me and for the two families' marriage alliance, urging me to stop Joe from confessing, to stop them from being together. At that time, to prevent Yvette from getting lovesick, I tried all sorts of ways to stop them. In the end, I had to use my savings to make Joe leave Yvette. Joe found the money insufficient and was unhappy, demanding more. I couldn't come up with it at once, and he increasingly contacted Yvette. Originally, with my tutoring, applying to a good university would have been no problem for Yvette, but she became completely infatuated with Joe, and I couldn't stop her. I had to borrow some money from my father and gave it to Joe. He happily dumped Yvette and flaunted with different girls in a humiliating manner. Recently, Yvette was heartbroken and sad, so I stayed by her side, helping her with tutoring, helping her apply to a good university. I stayed with her until graduation, when both families began discussing engagement. At that time, I thought their relationship was completely over. But I underestimated Yvette's lovesick brain. She actually got back together with Joe behind my back. Not only that, she pretended to be focused on our wedding plans, deceiving even me. Just before the engagement banquet, Yvette was kidnapped, and when I hurried over with money, I saw her snuggled in Joe's arms. Looking shy, only when she glanced at me did I see nothing but hatred in her eyes. I was surrounded and beaten by over 30 people, while Yvette stood by laughing. She was still wearing the wedding dress that I had carefully chosen when we got engaged. "Yvette, you actually lied to me?" She walked over, linking arms with the smug Joe Haslam, her high heels viciously stomping on my wounds as she turned and turned again. With an angry glare, she cursed at me. "Lie to you? Zion Stabler, you're just a damn fool. What's wrong with me lying to you? Didn't you lie to me? You took away everything I wanted the most, lied to me for so long, and to get me you used despicable and shameless means. You deserve to die. Do you know how much I love him? Do you know what I want? For all these years, he has always been in my heart. Seeing you makes me want to throw up. If it weren't for you meddling, we wouldn't have been apart for so many years. I'm telling you, I never loved you, and I never wanted to marry you. If it weren't for you, we might already have kids by now. It's all your fault, you worthless piece of trash. You really deserve to die." The cold steel pipe struck me again and again. Pain unlike anything I had felt before. The bright red blood blurred my vision. My whole body seemed to be covered by this bone-chilling cold and despair. Before I died, I mocked myself fiercely. My love for Yvette was no less than her love for others. I wanted her to live well, to give her the best of everything. If only Joe Haslam had truly loved her and hadn't gotten into gambling, I would have let go. But it wasn't the case. I loved her, and I couldn't bear to see her suffer. Yet in the end, she hated me to the core. At this moment, I realized she couldn't understand. She only felt that I blocked her path. At that time, Yvette looked at my body covered in scars, completely ignoring them. She fixated on the engagement ring that had been taken from me, her tone obsessive and dark. "If my heart weren't as dead as ashes, how could I agree to marry you? Zion Stabler, in my eyes, you're worthless. A fool who has nothing but money. You don't deserve love. Love will never happen to disgusting people like you." I watched helplessly as she stomped on the engagement ring I had carefully chosen and customized. She once again threw herself into Joe Haslam's arms, as if to get back at me, and they began to kiss passionately. I continued to be beaten, blood flowing as if it would never end. Memories from before my death were vividly replaying in my mind. It felt as though the pain made me relive it all over again. They got into the car and that group of people drove away. And that crazy Yvette, to get back at me, began to have an affair in the car. I was in so much pain that I could barely breathe, my insides feeling like they were shifting. At first, I could resist, but now I could only wait for death in despair and collapse. Soon, 3 wild dogs came rushing at me. They had fierce eyes, drooling and greedily biting at my calves and arms. Their teeth were sharp and cruel. Overwhelming pain enveloped me. I stared in despair and anger at the car that was moving up and down. The car window rolled down, and Yvette, her cheeks flushed, said to me in a stutter, "Zion, this is the dog Joe specially raised for you. It's been starving for days, so just enjoy it. Someone like you deserves to die without a complete corpse." My heart shattered, yet I could only watch as my own body was being gnawed at, bit by bit, dying in despair and collapse. Even in this life, in the midnight dreams, that heart-wrenching pain still howled fiercely within me. In this life, I would no longer stop her in the slightest. I would watch her chase after her own love. Yvette had been spending more and more nights away from home, each time lying under my name to make excuses. Without restraint, She lied at the drop of a hat. I was having dinner when I saw the two people walk in. Naomi Stabler, the illegitimate daughter, standing beside me, her face twisted with jealousy. I looked up at the two of them holding hands as they walked over, and I couldn't help but sigh. Joe Haslam was quite good-looking. He looked like a flamboyant male villain straight out of a TV drama, with striking features, a cold aura, and an inexplicable domineering presence. There was a scar on his brow, but it didn't affect his looks at all. Rather, it gave him an indescribable charming quality. Beside him, Yvette had transformed from the aloof school beauty into a blushing, shy young girl in love. As soon as they appeared, they attracted a lot of attention. Joe Haslam domineeringly opened a drink for Yvette, then slowly peeled shrimp for her. When he glanced at me, his eyes were full of pride and arrogance. He was blatantly showing off his success. Yvette's expression was one of pure happiness as she delicately tasted the shrimp, moved. Naomi Stabler, deeply provoked by this scene, had a twisted expression, as if she was about to puncture the chicken leg on her plate. Her unusual behavior made Yvette a bit displeased, and she frowned slightly. "Naomi, who are you making that face for? Is it bothering you that I'm dating Joe?" Naomi was taken aback for a moment, then quickly recovered, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Yvette, I'm just a bit sad for my brother after all. Naomi Stabler hadn't finished her sentence when I immediately interrupted her. I certainly wouldn't let this illegitimate daughter push the blame onto me. "Naomi, don't be a busybody. Who Yvette chooses to be with is her own business. I congratulate them for finally getting together. What are you barking about now?" I had no fondness for this illegitimate girl. In fact, she had done plenty of despicable things in her previous life, making it hard to put into words. Naomi shot me a fierce glare, her face flushed, and she picked up her plate and fled in embarrassment. Yvette frowned at me, her tone somewhat anxious. "Zion, what are you doing here? Didn't you go home for dinner today?" I glanced at the array of food boxes before me and smiled. "I've had a heavy study load recently, so my family sends meals over. Do you want to eat together?" We usually ate together with balanced meals that were much better than cafeteria food. Yvette was usually picky, but this time she shook her head and declined my offer. Joe Haslam's eyes were also on the food boxes, staring at the large portions of meat and fish. Then he looked at his own meager meal of just a bowl of shrimp, a bowl of rice, and 2 bowls of free soup, feeling quite pitiful in comparison. His expression darkened as he stopped his bold action of peeling shrimp and began to dig into his rice instead. Noticing that Yvette hadn't moved for a while, I glanced at her and spoke irritably. "What's wrong? Don't you think it's tasty? I didn't take away any of your good food, did I?" Yvette quickly shook her head and lowered her head to eat her rice, not daring to look at me again. After a moment, Joe grew impatient. He stood up, tugged at her, and called out loudly, "All right, stop eating. Are you coming back with me tonight or not? If I'm going back, then let's go." Yvette hurriedly stood up. Under my gaze, her expression was somewhat unpleasant. Her cheeks flushed, but she looked at me and whispered, "I have something to do, so I'll leave first." Even though I knew they had been spending every day and night together, seeing it with my own eyes left me at a loss for words. Especially Joe's smug expression, like a victorious rooster, was even harder to describe. Yvette really was degrading herself for this man. Before leaving, she didn't forget to turn around and warn me. "Zion, I'll handle my own matters with my family. You'd better not report behind my back." If this were a while ago, I definitely wouldn't have allowed her to degrade herself for a man. But in the end, I still smiled and nodded as I watched Yvette jog after that man. Yvette, who was used to luxury, glanced at the untouched meat and fish on my plate before leaving, swallowing hard. Having grown up together, I was familiar with her appetite and knew she hadn't eaten enough. But at this moment, she had nothing to do with me. I had seen her quite a bit lately, whether in the cafeteria eating cheap meals with Joe or sitting on his shabby motorcycle dressed in wrinkled designer clothes. She had turned from a delicate little princess into a disheveled girl on the streets, yet she seemed to be enjoying herself. I often heard classmates talk about how Yvette was now going out all night with Joe while the rest of us focused on our studies. When I was picked up by the driver after school, I sat in the back seat watching videos sent by the boys in our class. When I opened one, Joe's impatient voice came through. "Yvette, you're even worse than a super soldier. Are you here to be a punching bag? Come here, hurry up. What are you doing? Young lady, can you even do this? Seriously." Yvette clumsily tried to comply, her little face scrunched up in a fluster. Joe looked thoroughly impatient, cursing as he urged her on, his tone far from pleasant. Not only that, after losing in the game, he slammed his hands on the keyboard, complaining disdainfully. I couldn't help but laugh. Was this really the love Yvette had dreamed of? A woman who came to him, trying hard to please, really seemed cheap in a man's eyes. I was just waiting to see how long she could maintain this so-called love. However, what Yvette didn't know was that she could never go back to being the young lady who was always catered to. I would personally cut off all her escape routes. I knew how Joe had wormed his way into Yvette's heart. It was on her 16th birthday when she persistently begged to go to a bar. I refused, believing that the innocent and pure Yvette in my heart didn't belong in such places. She should focus on her studies. Our families had always raised us together. I had seen her when she was sulking and when she worked tirelessly to master the piano. I had accompanied her through many days. Our families had always viewed us as future successors, expecting us to be the best in everything, including our studies. But on Yvette's 16th birthday, during her rebellious phase, when I disagreed, she stubbornly refused to go home with me. Rejecting the driver's offer, she ran off to the bar with a few girls. It was Joe who showed up when she was surrounded by a bunch of thugs trying to harass her. With a few quick moves, he chased the thugs away. From that moment on, the young thug became Yvette's idol, her hero. Her heart was turned upside down by that little thug. But she didn't realize that it was all a setup orchestrated by Joe and his little brothers. There couldn't be that many coincidences. In my past life, I had explained everything to Yvette Larkin, but the brazen little thug Joe Haslam in her eyes was completely upright. Meanwhile, who had taken care of him since childhood and grown up with her as childhood sweethearts, was seen as a dark and disgusting person. She wouldn't listen. The favored daughter of heaven was entirely biased towards that thug. In my past life, while I was desperately trying to persuade her to study hard and focus on her exams, she had already fallen deeply in love with Joe. I discovered it while staying up all night making notes for her and checking her practice test papers. I never expected that among those papers, there would be countless love letters from Yvette, the favored daughter, written to Joe. She also started to indulge in online gaming, with endless games on her computer. Her former hobbies, like playing the piano, were all thrown aside. Not once did she think about her dreams. When I reminded her, she would show an impatient expression. She frequently quarreled with the Larkin family elders and with me. Whenever someone restricted her from gaming, she would get red in the face and argue fiercely. The most serious incident was when Mr. Larkin slapped her. She pushed back defiantly, saying fiercely, "You're all just obsessed with this piano dream. Can't you stop imposing your antiquated thoughts on me? I have my own talent. I won't forget those things. Besides, what's wrong with playing online games? Can't I have my own personal space? I'm a person. I have my own freedom, and I shouldn't be controlled like a puppet." At that time, I noticed that the spark she once had while playing the piano was gone. Her academic performance plummeted. But Yvette had changed. She wouldn't listen to anyone. Just like in this life, she had secretly dated Joe, going to internet cafes to play games all night long, going to bars to drink and seek thrills. When I caught her during those times and dragged her home, she would always question me angrily. "Useless, Zion Stabler. You're just a useless person. All you think about are those unreasonable, antiquated adults. I thought you could understand me. Can't you have your own thoughts? We should have our own world." I had spoiled her since childhood. reluctant to say harsh words, and could only advise her with a heavy heart, explaining a bunch of reasons. Later, she calmed down a lot, and I thought she was listening, so I worked even harder to help her study. I put in a lot of effort to find a famous piano teacher to customize lessons for her. I did so much for her. It got to the point where I saw Joe betting with others, saying, "Yvette, what a bitch. I'll spend 3 months just to make her willingly come to me and sleep with me for free. By then, I'll be bored and pass her on to my buddies for a taste. After all, she's a rich girl, spoiled and soft. It might be a different kind of fun. If I can win her over, I'll be set for life, living carefree." My blood boiled, and I could no longer contain my anger. I rushed forward to fight him. I fought 5 of them alone. I knew I couldn't win, but I couldn't bear to hear them casually talking about Yvette in such a vulgar way. To me, she had always been the best, pure and flawless, and I wouldn't allow anyone to tarnish her. The fight left me bloodied and bruised. I suffered quite a bit. I thought that when I saw Yvette, I would surely tell her the truth and help her see through that scoundrel. However, when she arrived, she immediately ran to Joe, not even glancing at me. Instead, she angrily accused me of being in the wrong. "Zion, what the hell is wrong with you? Are you a mad dog? Biting people randomly. What happens between Joe and me is mutual. Who are you to point fingers here? I'm telling you, my engagement with you doesn't count. I'll talk to my father about it later. Can you stop pestering me like a pathetic dog? It's really disgusting." At that moment, my injuries throbbed painfully, and the evening breeze stung my face. I thought that after all these years, she would at least be able to distinguish right from wrong. I had already sent her messages explaining everything in detail, but she was still under the spell of love, choosing to forget indirectly. She was completely hopeless. That night, I watched them support each other as they left. Joe even turned his head, grinning at me with disdain, his eyes full of triumph. I couldn't help but mock myself and walked away indifferently, swearing not to interfere in her matters anymore. A tremendous event happened in the Larkin family. Mr. and Mrs. Larkin called me over. When Mrs. Larkin saw me, she pleaded, "Zion, I can only ask you for help. Since childhood, Yvette has always listened to you the most. But now, she actually wants to cut ties with the family for that little thug. As her mother, I can't just watch her go down the wrong path. Her father is already sick with worry. If she really sets her heart on that man, her life will be ruined. So in my past life, I couldn't bear to do nothing. In the end, I intervened, but it all ended up like that. In this life, even though the fights didn't happen, she repeatedly lied and stayed out all night. Ultimately, the Larkin elders discovered everything and forcibly brought her back. Last night was a mess, and in the middle of the night, she climbed out the window and ran away. Without a care, she left behind harsh words of severing ties and blocked everyone, then just disappeared. Mrs. Larkin cried in front of me, utterly heartbroken, pleading for me to bring her back and talk to her. This time, I shook my head and spoke firmly. "Auntie, I actually tried to persuade her a long time ago, but it was useless. Yvette said I'm a useless person who doesn't deserve to be in front of her, blocking her love and freedom. Although she hadn't said those words in this lifetime, it was only because I hadn't intervened. If I had, it would have been just like last time. She would have humiliated me with the most hurtful language. So, Auntie, let's cancel my engagement with Yvette. I can't persuade her, and there's nothing I can do." This time I spoke with utmost determination. If she wanted to destroy herself, then I would shut the door for her and cut off her way back. Mrs. Larkin stood there in disbelief, swaying on her feet, her usually dignified eyes red and trembling. "How could this happen? You were the closest, weren't you?" I gently supported her and explained, "Auntie, you know Yvette's personality. We can't force her. I won't force her to marry me either. If she doesn't love me, I don't want to sacrifice my own marriage." In the end, I sent Mrs. Larkin away and focused on preparing for the exam. On the day of graduation, Yvette didn't even attend the exam. I heard that Mr. Larkin called the police right after he was discharged from the hospital, having them take her and Joe Haslam away. Mr. Larkin forced her to take the college entrance exam and even slapped her. Protective of his man, Joe Haslam got into a fight with Mr. Larkin. Yvette screamed that she was determined to give up on the exam and sever ties with the Larkin family. The scene became chaotic, and eventually, it ended with the Larkin parents falling ill from anger and being hospitalized. Yvette, however, ran freely toward her love. When I came out of the exam room and learned all of this, I couldn't describe the feelings inside me. I didn't expect her to be so infatuated with love. It was foolish. Mr. Larkin, who had been proud his entire life, would never allow a man like Joe Haslam, who had torn his face, to enter the Larkin family. The Larkin couple was still young. They could have more children. As for that foolish Yvette, if she didn't wake up soon, she would definitely never go back to that family. The young lady no longer had any financial value. Would Joe Haslam still treat her the same? I was really looking forward to it. The entrance of the exam room was crowded with parents and students, along with some media and reporters. The street outside the school was bustling with activity. I heard from the servants at home that the Larkin couple was in the hospital, and I saw Yvette, who hadn't gone to the hospital. She was sitting on Joe Haslam's dilapidated motorcycle, her cheeks pale from the wind, and her hair in disarray. Yet, in that state, she leaned against Joe Haslam's back, and the two looked incredibly happy. Rumors spread like wildfire. The once favored daughter had fallen from grace and became the target of everyone's mockery. Her reputation was ruined overnight, sacrificed for what she called love. Their love, their romance, became the courage that made her parents sick with anger. It also accelerated her notoriety. I began helping my father manage the family business, slowly familiarizing myself with everything. I was also planning to study abroad. In my last life, I died without a complete corpse, and in this life I would definitely stand at the top and watch them live in hell. I must achieve success and fulfill my own dreams. I no longer deliberately sought information about Yvette. At this point, she didn't need my help anymore. I didn't do anything. I just needed to stand by and watch without interfering. And this useless person would completely ruin herself. After she ran toward love, I would wait and see what kind of freedom and future she would gain. However, some things didn't mean I wouldn't know just because I didn't look for them. Someone took the initiative to come to me, grinning as they told me everything. "Zion, aren't you going to do anything? The Larkin family is severing ties with Yvette." Her nervous breathing became a bit rushed, and her voice was loud, which annoyed me a little. I coldly stared at her, unimpressed. "So what? What does that have to do with me? I would rather Yvette have no way out at all." "Zion, what's wrong with you? Didn't you like her the most? Now she's going to marry Joe Haslam. Aren't you going to care? What's going on with you? They slept together and you didn't care. Now they're getting married, and you're still indifferent. If this continues, you're really going to lose Yvette completely." Looking at her flushed face, anxious and flustered, pretending to care for me, I couldn't help but laugh in anger. "So you want me to go pick up this trash? The Stabler family doesn't collect junk. Things that run to the garbage bin don't deserve to come back." I looked at Naomi Stabler with a smile, and an idea formed in my mind. In my last life, she was also restless and colluded with Yvette. Perhaps my downfall in the end had something to do with her. I had completely ignored her in my last life, and ultimately the Stabler family business fell into the hands of this illegitimate daughter. I hadn't forgotten the words she said when she and her mother returned back then, pointing at my severely depressed mother. She said, "Mom, Dad loves us so much. Then what about this bad aunt? Is she the mistress? Why does she want to ruin our family?" I have never seen such shameless mother and daughter. Because of her and her mother's scheming, my mother suddenly jumped down. She gave up her life right before my eyes. But it was also a form of retribution. Later, Naomi's mother died in a car accident. I also thought Naomi was brainless, unable to stir up any real trouble, so I let her bounce around for the time being. I just didn't expect her to end up on top in the end. It was the first time, so I didn't mind cleaning up after her too. Seeing the tears in her anxious eyes, I couldn't help but remind her, "All right, don't forget your identity. No matter how bad it gets, you are still the illegitimate daughter of the Stabler family. Now your status is even higher than Yvette's. What kind of man can't you attract? Broaden your horizons a bit. The things you like, you can fight for them yourself. Don't play any petty tricks on me. It's a waste of time. I won't be your pawn. As for what happens to Yvette, it has nothing to do with me." I said this seemingly casually, just touching on the topic. As for whether she was smart or not, that was up to her. I really didn't want to waste my thoughts on these insignificant people. After all, she was still under my control. This time, I absolutely wouldn't fail to achieve my goals and dreams because of arrogance. With the experiences and knowledge from my past life, I could rely on my memories and methods to build my own empire. Following the trend would definitely lead to profit. This was not just a chance for revenge. It was also an opportunity for me to turn the tables. Women were secondary, only status and money were a man's capital. However, there would always be stumbling blocks along the way. Ultimately, Larkin was soft-hearted, unable to let go of her daughter, and took Yvette back, locking her up. She begged me to be a mediator, and out of respect for our family's friendship, I had no choice but to go. I also had a sense of watching the drama unfold. Standing at her room's door, Larkin grabbed my hand with tearful eyes and repeatedly urged, "Zion, Yvette is pregnant. This child really can't be kept. I beg you to help me persuade her." I nodded and pushed the door open. Yvette was originally crying hysterically, but her face instantly twisted with rage when she saw me. As I closed the door, she picked up a vase and hurled it at me. Her hair was a mess, and she was spouting some coarse language, just like a street woman. I could no longer see the image of the proud princess in her. Truly, one who associates with the red becomes red, and one who associates with the black becomes black. Get lost, you little person. Zion, you disgusting little man. You think you can persuade me to get rid of the child? This is the fruit of my love with Joe. None of you can harm him. If anyone dares to touch a hair on him, I will never let you go. The hatred in her eyes was exactly the same as in my past life. She was only 18, just starting out in life, in the bloom of youth. But now, seeing her crazed insistence on having this child, I felt her blossom was already coming to an end. Fine, if you want to have it, go ahead. Follow your own heart. Looking at the shattered pieces on the ground, I left those words behind and turned to leave. This scene had never happened in my past life. Due to my repeated interventions, she remained the proud girl in the eyes of others, her reputation unscathed. Because long before the exam, when Larkin came to plead with me, I had solved Joe's issue with money. Once it was confirmed that he was truly ignoring her while bringing other women in and out of hotels, she gave up. She followed me to study, fully dedicated to her future. And after Joe received the second payment, he left this place. I spent money, yet what I got in return was my own demise. So this time, let her do whatever she wants. There was no way I would persuade her. I was just here to see her ridiculous state and satisfy my curiosity. In my past life, Yvette, who was solely focused on her studies and worked hard, eventually achieved great success. But she didn't remember my kindness at all. So being good to her was no better than being good to a dog. In the end, the bloodline of the Larkin family couldn't withstand Larkin's desperate measures. The usually proud Larkin agreed to Yvette's engagement with Joe. Joe accompanied her for prenatal checkups. Her belly was starting to show, and she looked so happy. Even though Joe, with his roguish demeanor, completely disregarded her pregnancy and smoked beside her, she still wore a blissful expression. I went to get a report and ran into them at the door. Yvette excitedly invited me. "Zion, in 3 days is my engagement banquet with Joe. You must come." I silently smiled and brushed past her. 3 days later, I boarded a plane for further studies abroad. As for their engagement banquet, it turned into a wedding, held in a very hasty manner, with Larkin's father not inviting anyone for fear of losing face. This time, I seized every opportunity, working hard and thriving abroad. Soon, using Stabler family resources and my own advantages, I made a decent first fortune and slowly began to establish my career. 2 years flew by and I returned to the country. However, I felt inexplicably disheartened at the airport because I saw the person I least wanted to encounter. Yvette Larkin somehow found out that I was back and blocked me at the airport. Her hair was dry and yellow, and she didn't wear any makeup, with many spots on her face, making her look like she had aged many years. Even her outfit was hard to describe. I pretended not to see her and turned away indifferently, but she pulled me back. Zion, it's me, Yvette. Please help me. Okay? Can you lend me some money? I beg you. I forcefully shook off the sobbing her. There were too many people at the airport. Her crying was really embarrassing, and I didn't expect her to ask for money right away. During the past year abroad, I hadn't cared about her at all, automatically removing her from my life. She followed me all the way to the car that was there to pick me up. From start to finish, she was crying, as if everyone owed her some kind of grievance. Seeing my cold attitude towards her, she began to wail again, every word filled with accusations against me. Zion, didn't you say you loved me the most? How could you treat me like this? I felt this woman was just here to make me laugh, and I couldn't help but speak up. Where are Joe and the kids? Zion, I'm begging you to help me get a divorce. Can we be together? You said you would protect me for a lifetime and treat me well. Will you marry me? Damn. At that moment, looking at her with tear-filled eyes and a heartbroken expression, I felt like the world had turned surreal, and my romantic brain suddenly woke up. Yvette Larkin, are you here to make a joke? Did you forget how you used to step on my face? Wasn't it about pursuing your own love and freedom without caring about anything? What are you doing here now? It's really ridiculous. I'm not a trash collector, so please get lost. Now, all I felt for her was disgust and nausea. In fact, looking at her face, I couldn't help but recall all the memories from my previous life before I died. It was already good enough that he had killed me. Would I marry her? Delusional. She couldn't believe it and cried even harder. She was on the brink of a breakdown, starting to pull her own hair and wailing loudly. Her crazy appearance made me even more repulsed. I told the driver to stop and open the door, unhesitatingly pushing her out. Outside, thunder flashed, and heavy rain poured down, soaking her clothes quickly. In the downpour, she cried out in despair, looking utterly pitiable. However, I wouldn't soften my heart for a woman like her anymore. She didn't deserve it. Yvette, I told you a long time ago that you have to pay the price for your actions. And let me tell you, the reason you've ended up like this is because of the cause and effect in this world. Don't ever show up in front of me again. Seeing you is annoying. I had the driver drive away, leaving her to collapse in the rainy night, automatically shutting out her heart-wrenching cries. When I returned, I learned that Yvette had a miscarriage. Initially, she had forced the Larkin family to accept Joe by using that child, and the two got married under the pressure. But after marriage, Joe turned out to be completely useless. He was not only lazy and uneducated but also squandered a large sum of money. No matter how Mr. Larkin tried to train him, it was all in vain, and on top of that, the Larkin family was ruined by him. He secretly took all their money to invest in some so-called projects in Southeast Asia and was completely scammed. I heard that Mr. Larkin accidentally fell down the stairs and died during an argument with him. Later, Mrs. Larkin also fell into deep sorrow and died mysteriously. The Larkin family was completely destroyed, ruined by this once favored daughter, Yvette. Knowing all this, my heart was filled with mixed emotions. My father wanted to see me, so I went to the study. I had always held resentment towards this man. However, now he seemed to have aged a lot. Zion, from now on, the Stabler family will be in your hands. Back then, your father was fooled by that scheming mother and daughter. When I found out she wasn't your father's own blood, I had already kicked her out of the Stabler family. From now on, you have the final say in this Stabler family. I expressionlessly took the share transfer contract signed by my father and turned to leave. I couldn't reconcile with him. After all, my mother had accompanied him from rags to riches, and his hands were stained with my mother's death. The rain in the provincial capital fell for 3 days and nights, and that annoying woman, Yvette, came again. She blocked my car door, shattering her pride, kneeling down and choking on her sobs. Zion, Joe is no good. He ruined me, ruined the Larkin family, and cheated on me. When I was 7 months pregnant, he was fooling around with Naomi. When I found out, he actually pushed me away cruelly, and I lost my child. Zion, while he's out fooling around all day, there's no place for me in his eyes. He has fallen for Naomi. Zion, but he doesn't want to divorce me. I beg you to help me. I want to escape from this devil. He comes back after losing at gambling and beats me, treating me like a punching bag. He has lost everything. Even Naomi has been taken to Southeast Asia by him. I snuck out, and you're the only one who can save me. She was kneeling on the ground, crying her heart out. Once the darling of the heavens, she now resembles a beggar. I couldn't help but scoff. Divorce? Isn't this what you begged for yourself? I kicked her away, ignoring her pale and pitiful face as I turned to leave. I don't hit women, but considering what she did to me, a kick was already lenient. However, she completely latched onto me, always managing to block my path. She haunted me, begging for my help. At the company entrance, she still knelt there without dignity, crying and screaming in despair. Zion, you once loved me the most. I only have you now, you can't just watch me die. Please, Zion, save me. I can't go back, he will definitely kill me. She cried like a delicate flower. Wanting to continue, I chuckled lightly and interrupted. What does this have to do with me? Ms. Larkin, please stop harassing me, or I will definitely call the police. She gasped in surprise, her entire body trembling as she cried even harder. Don't, Zion, you can't treat me like this. Seeing her heartbroken, I couldn't help but sneer. What have I done to her? Didn't I just stand by and watch? But wasn't that what she wanted the most back then? Watching her cry out in despair, murmuring, "Call the police," I couldn't help but intervene. All right, instead of continuing to pester me here, why not think carefully about how to face your beloved? That is your one true love. I mockingly glanced at her behind me and turned to leave. Bitch, I'm not dead yet, and you're here seducing men. Watch me not beat you to death. No, please, Zion, save me. As I walked toward the company entrance, I saw through the glass their entangled figures fighting. It was a one-sided domestic violence incident. At the entrance of my company, the security wanted to step in, but I raised my hand to stop them. I turned around and captured the scene on my phone. Joe was pulling her hair, slamming her to the ground again and again. Yvette went from begging for me to calling for help, her voice growing weaker. She was beaten, just like I was in my past life, while she coldly watched. The punches landing on her must not have hurt as much as it did for me back then. I saw a lot of blood pooling beneath her. The beating lasted 8 minutes, ending with the arrival of the police and paramedics after a bystander called 911. The police restrained Joe, who was still vigorously hitting Yvette, while the paramedics lifted the bloodied Yvette onto the ambulance. From start to finish, her vacant eyes were numb with tears, looking in my direction. Even from a distance, I could still see the regret, unwillingness, pain, and even despair in her eyes. I began to take domestic matters seriously in this lifetime. I am determined to stand at the highest point. Of course, what made me feel even better was that over the years I met a girl who was my equal. She is as exceptional as I am, and we have already decided to consider marriage. Two people resonating on the same frequency are the best companions for the soul, just like two people who admire each other can definitely go far together. I was here planning the wedding date. I also didn't completely ignore Yvette. Domestic violence could lead to divorce, but I couldn't stand Joe. I still remember the grudges from my past life. I have always been one to repay grievances. When my subordinate found out that Yvette's mother died because Joe switched her heart medication, I quickly had them gather all the evidence. The video footage of Yvette's mother was unexpectedly restored, revealing that Yvette's father was pushed down the stairs by Joe. I had all the collected evidence handed over to Yvette, while I stood back and watched them tear each other apart. I couldn't get my hands dirty dealing with this trash. When I received news that Joe was sentenced to life in prison, I felt quite pleased. I had someone announce the engagement with my girlfriend on the same day. The timing was a bit rushed, but it just so happened to be Valentine's Day, which also felt romantic and ceremonial. While I was on the phone, my girlfriend teased me, "Zion, I don't care. Even though we're getting engaged on Valentine's Day, you have to prepare 2 gifts for me every holiday from now on. Don't think you can trick me into getting you and then play games." I laughed and coaxed her for a long time. All right, you are my little ancestor." But when I went to pick up my girlfriend, she had disappeared. Just when I was anxious and at my wit's end, I never expected Yvette to take my girlfriend hostage. She wanted nothing, forcing me to meet her at the abandoned factory where I died in my past life. In a panic for my girlfriend, I drove quickly to the location. When I saw Yvette holding a knife to my girlfriend's neck, my mind went blank, especially when I noticed blood trickling from her neck. The whole world seemed to spin. I glared at Yvette fiercely, gritting my teeth as I spoke. "Yvette, are you out of your mind? You better think clearly about what you're doing now. Surrender now, and I can let bygones be bygones." I lied to her. After this, I would definitely not let this troublemaker off the hook. My girlfriend is my soft spot now. I will never allow anyone to hurt her and then get away with it. Yvette laughed uncontrollably. "Ha ha ha. Zion, didn't you love me the most? Aren't you my loyal dog? Why do you think you have the right to love someone else?" Looking at his crazed laughter, I truly felt she was a complete lunatic. "What will it take for you to let my Lily go?" Memories from my past life circled in my mind, and I gritted my teeth in hatred towards her. "Lily, you really are a sentimental type. I can let her go, but only if you come over and jump. Those who abandon me should die. Aren't you always saying you love him? Then trade your life for it." She twisted her face in a grotesque smile, a sinister look on her face as the dagger cut into my girlfriend's neck. She roughly moved my girlfriend aside, creating enough space for me to jump down. Watching the blinding blood, I gritted my teeth in anger. If looks could kill, I would have killed Yvette 1,000 times by now. Woo woo woo. My girlfriend's face was streaked with tears, and with her mouth covered, she pitifully shook her head at me. As I walked towards her step by step, my heart was in chaos, and I felt utterly helpless. Everyone has their own soft spot, and I didn't want her to get hurt. I was calculating whether I could survive the jump. This was the 7th floor. At the same time, I was also considering if there was any cushioning below or a way to make it worthwhile. It seemed she noticed my hesitation, and Yvette's face became even more twisted. She glared at me furiously. "Faster, or don't blame me for being rude." I could only numb myself and move forward. I was all in. My girlfriend kept stubbornly glaring at me, shaking her head and crying, and I felt a pang of heartache. As a man, seeing the woman I loved like this made me want to hold her in my arms and comfort her. But at this moment, facing this lunatic, I could only choose to go all out. However, just as I was about to jump, Yvette suddenly let go. My girlfriend quickly ran into my arms, and I held her tightly behind me, not understanding what Yvette was doing. Just a moment ago, she had a twisted, sinister face, but now she was streaked with tears, desperately whispering to me, "Zion, in the next life, let me love you." As the sound of police sirens rang out, she leaped off the 7th floor. Yvette was dead. Perhaps she never wanted to live in the first place. The day after her death, I received a delayed text she had sent me. She said she truly regretted not listening to me back then and losing the one who loved her the most. She said she didn't choose this way to hurt me, but just wanted me to remember her. But it was useless. She didn't know that we had already lived a lifetime together, and I could never remember her. I would only hate her to the bone. As for her regret and despair, I never felt pity. She said she had been mistreated by that man and had 2 children. But that had nothing to do with me. I didn't even bother to ask about her funeral. I was engaged to Lily, and our life was just beginning.